All right, welcome into One of One Sports. So today I thought we'd do a tier ranking on just the future outlook of every power, I guess it's power four now, college football team. And what I'm ranking as the future is basically them as a program, which I see as the next 3 to 5 years, because that's pretty much how long you can have a recruit for, right? So you're bringing someone in now. They could be 3 years, go to the NFL. They could redshirt a year, be five. Sure, we have 7 year players now. There's the transfers and all that. But I think generally a program is like a 3 to 5 year window. So that's what these teams are being ranked on. And you can see the tiers we have here. Expect a title, or I guess you call it a championship, might get a title, playoff caliber teams, mediocre, below average, and then the bottom of their conferences. And we can explain a little bit more as we're going along. I'm sure some teams will be sort of a gray area. But starting with the ACC and Boston College, and this one for me is between below average and bottom of the conference. I mean, you're not a big recruiting power, so there's not much there. I don't think they'll be the very worst team in the ACC, though, so we'll go below average. I'm going to go quicker through some of the smaller schools. Cal, you're kind of starting from scratch this year, even though you had some decent players last year. A lot of them transferred out. Again, doesn't recruit the best. This is another one, same tier as Boston College. I'm going to keep it below average. Clemson here is interesting because I think next year, like this upcoming year, they might win the championship. Having Cade Klubnik, having these awesome receivers, having a loaded D line, a ton of talent defensively, bringing in a new defensive coordinator, they might get a title. But after next year, I see them more as like a playoff caliber team, not like a title contender, kind of like what they've been the past couple of years. So right on the border. Because I'm so high on them next year, I'm going to do might get a title. But they're probably towards the bottom of the teams that I'll have in that tier. Duke, I actually like what they've been doing. They're going to have Darian Mensah, I would think, for at least a couple more years. Yes, you don't recruit well, but I like what Manny Diaz did year one. They've clearly shown they're investing in NIL to bring in a guy like Darian Mensah and other transfers. So I don't think they're quite playoff caliber. I think they're probably like top of the mediocre tier. Maybe could have a breakthrough year and get the playoffs. I'm putting them mediocre for now. Could move up though. Florida State is maybe the toughest team on here to rank just because what happened this year. I mean, they were worse than I think anyone thought they could be. And there's clearly still a ton of investment. You're going to recruit better than almost every school in the ACC, save for probably Miami, maybe Clemson. You're going to recruit. You're going to acquire transfers really well as well. And it's just kind of, do you think this year was the aberration? Do you think last year's the aberration? I think it's kind of a mixed bag. I still like their future outlook more than Duke just because of talent acquisition. And I could see them bouncing back and having a playoff year or two in the next 5 years. I'm going to put them in playoff caliber. Georgia Tech, I'm also going playoff caliber, and I rank their future ahead of Florida State. I really like what they're building there. I like their coach. I think next year the team's going to be really good, bringing back Haynes King, Jamal Haynes, having these receivers from FIU to bring in, and Rivers, and I'm forgetting the other player's name, but you have Rutherford back as well. So I think next year could be one of the best teams in Georgia Tech's history, and you just brought in your top-ranked recruiting class ever, including a five-star recruit on the O-line. So I think in like 2 years, 3 years, we're going to see that materializing, especially if they stack a couple more of like highly ranked classes by their standards. I think they will make the playoffs in the next 5 years. I'm high on Georgia Tech as a program. I think they have had a lot of potential for a while, and it's just starting to be realized. Louisville, this is interesting. It's between playoff caliber and mediocre. I like what their coach has done. And I'm going to say the end of playoff caliber because I think eventually they'll, like, their quarterbacks have been good and they've done really, like, they keep getting quarterbacks out of the transfer portal, Tyler Shuck, Miller, and now they're doing it with Miller Moss, Jack Miller, that is. And I think at some point you'll keep doing this. You might have a down year with it, but you also might hit big on one of it, especially as these quarterbacks keep proving to be successful. You'll have transfers like, oh, I know I can get done at Louisville. I think one of those years you might pop and be playoff caliber. So I'll put them there for now. There's potential to drop down to here, though. Miami is, I expect a title. That might be a hot take, but I can only pick at most 5 teams in the expected title tier, so I might have to drop Miami down later. But you're going to recruit at a really high level, I think, under Mario Cristobal, especially along the line of scrimmage, which I think is what you need to win. So the O-line, I think, is always going to be great. You bring in transfers well. You're going to be the most talented team in the ACC year after year. So I think you'll always be poised to be in the playoff, potentially securing a first-round bye, depending on how that system looks in the future with the playoff. And I think you'll be the best team in the ACC for the foreseeable future, giving you a lot of chances to get a run. And I'll say, right now I'm leaning towards they would get one of those. Just the talent acquisition, I think, is really high. North Carolina, this one, like Florida State's just tough to rate because I don't know what to think of them having Bill Belichick. Like, I don't want four teams in the playoff caliber from the ACC. And yeah, I'm going to drop them down to mediocre. I think you'll get a decent amount of talent, and Bill Belichick will do a decent job. But I actually don't think he'll do as well as Mac Brown. I think Mac Brown brought in a ton of talent and reached some pretty high heights. I think North Carolina will be looking at like 6 to 8 win seasons under Belichick, while Mac Brown was hitting like 8 to 9. So I'm gonna put him in the mediocre tier. Pitt, Pitt. You'll have Eli Holstein for the next. Is it Holstein? Next couple years at least. So there's that. I'm not super high on Pitt. I'm going below average. The order of this doesn't really matter too much. I just don't. Again, one of those teams you're not bringing in a ton of talent. I don't see a ton of star power. You'll probably have a year where you go in 8 win. A year where you get 8 wins. Probably have a down year and just be average in between that. NC State. I like CJ Bailey as a quarterback enough to put them in the mediocre. Because for the next couple of years at least, I think you'll get good quarterback play, and I like David Doran enough as a coach. He's been pretty solid. Looking at SMU, do we go? I mean, they just made the playoff, so you could be playoff caliber. Um, Kevin Jennings is going to be back. I think here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add. Do we add another tier? Because not all these teams do I think are playoff caliber, but I think they like mediocre doesn't really describe it. Like there's a gap between Duke and this is tough. We'll leave it. We'll leave it for now. But I am going to drop Louisville down now because I don't see them making the playoff in the next 5 years or really coming that close. SMU, I think, will have a couple runs where they at least get close. So we're going to do that. I like Jennings as a quarterback, and Rhett Lashley, I think, is proven to be a good coach. Stanford, it's between below average, bottom of the conference. Well, I think I'm going to go below average just because I think Elijah Brown could be a good quarterback for them. And they actually are more talented than most teams in the ACC. So I'm going to put them below average. Syracuse, mediocre. I like what their coach has done. But you had Kyle McCord. I think you take a step back. Virginia, I think bottom of the conferences. I think you lost a lot of the talent you had this year that made the team take leaps, and now you're going to take a step back. Virginia Tech, I below average as well. I think this was supposed to be kind of the year with all this returning production, and it was not even a good year. I think you probably get a little worse, and you're a below average team in the ACC for the next couple of years. And then Wake Forest, I will put at bottom of the conference. Again, talent acquisition, haven't been very good. I do think for next year specifically, bringing in all these Washington State transfers, they could actually surprise some people, including myself. But over the next 5 years as a whole, I don't think they'll be very good. So now we're through the ACC, and this is what the list is looking like. This SMU, Louisville, Duke tier, this is where I could move, like any of those teams are close to getting this last playoff caliber spot. Moving on to the SEC, starting with Alabama, and I'm going to expect a title. I think Keelan Russell is going to be a great quarterback for them. For even if he doesn't start this next year, I think you get at least 2 years of that. I still believe in Kalen DeBoer a ton as a coach. You're still recruiting really well. You're going to have one of the most talented rosters year in and year out. You're going to do well in the portal. You've got all the investment, the brand. It's all there. You've brought in Ryan Grubb as an OC, which I like as well. You've got Ryan Williams for the next 2 years. I think Alabama will win a title under Kalen DeBoer in this next 3 to 5 year span. And I would predict probably you win one with this like Keelan Russell, Ryan Williams era in like 2 years. I think that's so weird to say, but like if I'm envisioning it like in my head, because this is all just projection, like that second year or like 2 years from now where Ryan Williams is a junior, maybe the best receiver in the country, well, probably behind Jeremiah Smith, and Keelan Russell is one of the most talented quarterbacks, you could win a title that year. Auburn, I don't think this isn't. They're definitely not expecting a title. I don't think they're going to get a title, but I would put them playoff caliber just because the recruiting is really, really good. The transfer portal has been really, really good. So you're bringing in all this talent. And I do think Hugh Freeze with this talent is going to, like this year, you're going to have one of the best wide receiver cores in the country. You had one of the best transfer portal classes as a whole. You're recruiting really well. I could see them making the playoffs next year, depending on what Jackson Arnold or Ashton Daniels can do for them at quarterback. And I think they're going to continue to stack talent. And I actually think they have one of the better looking futures in the SEC right now. Arkansas does not, and I would go bottom of the conference. Now, Arkansas as a whole, like I think they're better than a lot of these teams. but a lot of these SEC teams invest more than the teams at the bottom of the ACC. So even though Arkansas, like having Taylor Green next year could be a decent team, you're not as good as most of the other SEC teams. Georgia, so the fans probably expect a title. I'm going to say might get a title just because you won back to back, right? And yes, I do think Kirby Smart is still probably the best coach in the country. But with how teams are taking talent off this Georgia roster every year from the portal, and how it looks like Georgia is actually like, they are not like super, or they're not much worse than they were when they won the title, but I feel like you can see the kind of decline. Quarterback hasn't been great. So I'm not ruling out they could get a title as well. But right now, if I'm predicting only 5 teams in this tier here, Georgia is going to might get a title. Florida going playoff caliber ahead of Florida State. And this is really based on a belief in DJ Lagway over the next 2 years. He could be the best quarterback in the country. And when you have that, you could even get up to might get a title. But I haven't seen enough around him from what Florida has done to put them there. So for now, it's just playoff caliber. Kentucky, I think, also going to go bottom of the conference. And it's a similar thing with Arkansas. Like, you're probably going to have more talent than a lot of these teams, but it's relative to the rest of your conference. And based off this last year from Kentucky, I feel like the program is getting worse. You're losing talent, and I think they're going to be one of the bottom teams in the SEC. LSU, playoff caliber team. I mean, like, if you'd asked me like after they lost Bryce Underwood, I was leaning more towards here. But now, so I'm moving them up. Still below Florida, but this next year you brought in the best transfer portal class, because you have Garrett Nussmeier back, because of all the investment that's gone into the program, you could be a playoff team. And even after that, you're going to continue to recruit really well. I still think Brian Kelly's a good coach. You're going to continue to have investment, and I think they could make a playoff for sure. Mississippi State, I would also put bottom of the conference, which means I'm actually going to move Arkansas up to below average, and we'll put them at the top of below average. Mississippi State, I mean, it's just been rough, and you just lost a quarterback, what I thought would have been your quarterback of the future, to LSU, probably now LSU's quarterback of the future. You recruit at one of the lower levels in the SEC, so I think it's going to be rough there. Missouri, this is tough, because if we had done this video like 2 years ago, I would have said playoff caliber, but now I would say mediocre, just because like this next year, I don't believe in the quarterback a ton, and I don't know if Missouri is going to have a great quarterback at some point in the next few years, and you're not going to have as talented as a roster as you've had these past couple years with having guys like Luther Burden, Theo Weiss. You lost your top recruit to Nebraska, your top recruit in program history. So I'd look at Missouri as more mediocre right now. I don't know who's going to be in below average. Oklahoma, I would go mediocre. I'm skeptical of Brent Venables, but the recruiting is still good. This next year with John Mateer, I don't really know how good that's going to be. I mean, I don't think they're going to be below average. Like, I think they're going to be a solid program, good defensively, because Brent Venables is a really good defensive coach. Still think they'll have questions offensively. I don't really see playoffs, though, and I don't think this Oklahoma team is like a few years. Like, even if you just asked me last year or coming into this year, I thought the future was really bright, and now I'm a bit more skeptical on it. Ole Miss, I'm actually going to go might get a title. I like Lane Kiffin on the field as a coach, and I think what they're doing in the transfer portal year after year, being in like every year top 3 in transfer portal, I think it kind of makes up for what they lack in recruiting compared to other SEC schools. And Lane Kiffin continues to produce really good offenses. I think even this next year, they're probably a playoff team. And if the school continues to keep adding more and more investment, this program could continue to grow and be an even bigger power in the SEC of the future. South Carolina is an interesting one, because next year, I would maybe borderline put them on might get a title. But after that, I don't really see it like Shane Beamer replicating that like over the next 5 years. So I would go more towards playoff caliber, but definitely not mediocre. And this next year, at least with Lenore Sellers, has a lot of upside. You still have guys like Dylan Stewart, Josiah Thompson in the future who are really good. Tennessee, I'd go might get a title. I think this next year, looking at just the quarterbacks, having Nico for at least next year, and then having Faison Brandon after that number 1 quarterback to recruit next year, having Josh Heupel as a coach, that's really all I need to see. It kind of reminds me of that Clemson model where you got Deshaun Watson, then you got a top recruit in Trevor Lawrence. I know Hunter Johnson was between that. But then you bring in a DJ Uyangale. That doesn't work out, but then you bring a Cade Klubnik, and because one guy worked out, it starts piling on. I kind of see that as like the Hendon Hooker, Joe Milton, and now we've got Nico, and now we're going to have Brandon, and it's just going to keep going because these guys believe in what Heupel's doing. And now you're adding good defense to that, which I think can continue. Tennessee, I could definitely see winning a title in these next 3 to 5 years. Texas, I would put expect a title. You're going to expect the title next year with Arch Manning. As long as you have Sark and Texas recruiting at, I would imagine, at minimum a top 5 recruiting class every year. So you're going to have a top 5 talented team. Sark's going to be calling plays, so you're going to have a good offense. The defense has also been amazing. I would put them in expecting a title. Texas A&M, this might be a hot take. I'm going top of the mediocre tier. It's tough because this next year they've put a lot of investment. I like Mike Elko, but I'm not a huge believer in Marcel Reed, even adding all these pieces around him from the transfer portal wide receiver. And I think they're probably a 7 to 8 win team. I could see a year where you get in the playoff, but I don't want to put all these SEC teams right there. So I'm gonna put top of mediocre, and then Vanderbilt, I'm going below average with Arkansas, but the top of that, because I did like what Clark Lee did this year, and I could see them continuing that. It's just all these teams, like I believe in Alabama, Texas, Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee. Like I believe in those teams a lot. And then I like Auburn and Florida and LSU and South Carolina, and I still like A&M, Missouri, and Oklahoma, but I'm not going to put them all. Like it's got to be some differentiation. Quickly through the Big 12. This one's weird because none of them are going to be expecting a title or might get a title. I'll tell you that now. So we can go down a little bit. Playoff caliber is weird though. Like Arizona, right now I'm looking at below average. I don't really like what they're, and I'm rooting for Arizona. I root for Arizona. Yeah, I have a lot of friends who go there. But based off the failure that was this year, and I'm not a big believer in the coach. It's just tough because I root for this team and it looks bleak to me. ASU, I am going to go playoff caliber based off what they did this year. I think Kenny Dillingham's a great coach. I think you're going to get more investment. I think Tyson and Levitt back for at least next year is going to be a really bright thing as well. Levitt back for, you would think, maybe 2 more years, so that the outlook short term is at least really good. And you've had sanctions on you. So you've been doing all this without sanctions. You keep doing this success. The recruiting's going to boost. The transfer portal is going to boost. I think they're playoff caliber. Baylor, I'm going to put in the mediocre. It's kind of, I'm still in wait and see was this, like, what years are the aberrations with Baylor under Dave Aranda? Because they're never going to be the most talented team. So it's all about coaching and development. So it's hard to say. BYU, pretty much the same. Like, yes, he broke out this year. But I don't know if that's like replicable, especially at a program like Brigham Young that's never really done that year after year and is new to the power ranks. UCF, I think it's going to be a bit of time before we see UCF under Scott Frost take off, if they do at some point. I think it's going to, maybe at the end of this 3 or 5 year period, they start being better. But until then, I think they're below average. Cincinnati, I'm going to say bottom of the conference. I just don't think you recruit well enough in the Big 12, and that's not like a super high bar. I think it could be rough. Colorado, I'm going playoff caliber. I like Deion Sanders. You're going to have Caden Stalton this year, but after that, having Juju Lewis as the quarterback of the future, I think is something I could believe in. I think Deion's going to get these difference makers, at least like almost one a cycle, that in the Big 12 can lead you to winning the conference and making a playoff. Now, I don't think you can get a title, but you make a playoff. Houston, I'm going below average. Maybe the recruiting can start to turn up, and I do like Willie Fritz as a coach, and even getting Connor Wigman. I could see them surprising people this year. But as of right now, I need to see something before I can believe in them more. Iowa State this next year, I think, could be playoff caliber. But then after that, I think they would reset and be below average. I think it kind of averages out to mediocre just because you're probably going to lose Rocco Beck soon. And once, like I think we saw with Brock Purdy, once these guys leave, Iowa State has to rebuild kind of from the ground up because you don't recruit really well. And it's all on development. Get tired here. Kansas, I like Lance Leipold as a coach a lot. Like the Big 12, they're all kinds. I just like their coaches, but you don't recruit well enough. I don't see you breaking into this tier. I don't think you're going to be bad. Kansas State, I'm going playoff caliber. Avery Johnson, I think could break out next year, and I'm not sure he's like an NFL guy. So for that reason, you have like 2 more years of Avery Johnson. The recruiting's actually been decent, and another coach I really like. I think they make the playoff maybe even as soon as next year. Then Oklahoma State. I guess bottom of the conference because this year was really bad. I think it might get worse. Mike Gundy might leave. So I think the future for Oklahoma State could be rough. TCU is a tough one because they're probably going to be the best at the Big 12 in talent acquisition. So that could see them being playoff caliber. Um, and they've already made the playoff under Sonny Dykes and actually been to a title, but it hasn't been the same since then. So I'm going to put them at the bottom of playoff caliber just because I like their talent acquisition compared to the rest of the Big 12. And again, another coach I think is really good. Texas Tech, I'm going like towards the top of mediocre just because they seem to have a lot of investment this year in the portal, but I need to see that investment consistently over the next few years before I fully believe in them as a playoff threat. Utah, because Kyle Whittingham's going to be leaving soon, I'm going to put them more towards mediocre. If I knew Kyle Whittingham was going to be staying, I would probably have them playoff caliber. But I think so much of what's made Utah great is the coaching. And then West Virginia, I'm going to put mediocre as well. I like Rich Rod as a coach, and I think he can do a lot with little, but he's not going to be working with a lot at West Virginia, and I do think that'll stop him from being playoff caliber. Final conference, the Big Ten. All right, let's go. So Illinois, I think they're going to be good this year, and I like Brett Bielema as a coach, but I don't think they're going to ever make a playoff. I'm going mediocre. And this is based off recruiting, right? Indiana, you just made a playoff. Signetti's been great. But I am going top of mediocre just because I think this reliance on the transfer portal and this easy schedule they kind of happen to get this year, I don't think it's going to break that way again. I think you're looking more towards mediocre. Iowa, same deal. You're going to be losing Kirk Ferentz soon, and you're going to be really good defensively, though, but not a lot on offense. Maryland, I'm actually going to put a mediocre because I like the quarterback they brought in this year. Right now, the number 2 recruit in the country for next year signed on. And if Maryland starts recruiting better in the local area around them, they could be a threat, actually, kind of a sleeping giant. Michigan, well, not there. Michigan is between might get a title and expect a title. Right now, I'm going to put them in expected title because I do think Bryce Underwood is a borderline generational type of player at the quarterback position. When you have that guy, I think you expect to win a championship. And with all the momentum they got at the end of this year, I think that could carry over into even next year and beyond. So although I was skeptical of Sharon Moore initially, I'm believing this program again as a guy who roots for Michigan. I think expected title is fair. Michigan State, I think below average. Jonathan Smith, I do believe is a good coach, but I just haven't seen the signs indicating this is going upwards. Minnesota, I would put in below average as well. Kind of had a breakout this year, but I think they're a team that will have a year like this and then go back to being towards the bottom for a little, then have another year like this, and it'll just average out to below average. Nebraska, I'm going to put playoff caliber because these next 2 years under Dylan Raiola with Matt Rhule as a coach, I actually think they will make a playoff in these next 2 years under Raiola. I believe in this Nebraska program right now. Northwestern, that's an easy bottom of the conference for me. I mean, there's not a ton of talent. The coaching, it's just rough for them. Sorry, Northwestern fans. Ohio State, right now I would have in might get a title. Just because you just won one, so I think it's going to be hard to do again in the short term. You're going to have Jeremiah Smith, but Julian Sainz, an unproven product. Yes, Tavian St. Clair could take over, but right now I think he's probably the 3rd best quarterback from his class behind the guys Alabama and Michigan got. And you invested a ton here. I can keep investing a ton. The recruiting's going to be there. You're always going to be in a position to get a title, but I can only put 5 teams here, and I think there's one more team I'm going to put here. So I'm putting them in might get a title, but they would be, if I was organizing this, it'd be like that. Then Oregon, this team I'm talking about, I got to put them here to move them up. This for me is a clear expected title. This isn't in any order, by the way, but Oregon, we'll organize it. Oregon, probably like that. Oregon, I think, is definitely expected title tier. Wait, pause. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oregon, definitely expected title tier. Under Dan Lanning, I think he's going to be one of the best coaches in college football. You recruit at one of the highest levels in college football. You bring in transfers at one of the best rates in college football. This program's been on the rise for a while. I think Dan Lanning's taking him to even new heights. You won the Big Ten in year 1. Now you have the best recruiting class of the Big Ten, best transfer class. I think you'll have the best quarterback. I think you can win the title as soon as next year. Super bright outlook for Oregon. Penn State is another one of these teams, I'm going to say, might get a title, and that's mostly based off next year with Drew Aller and all these returning players. But the inability from James Franklin to get over the big game is really what stops me from saying expected title next year. And then after that, I do think you go back to being that 9-win, 10-win team that you've been in the past, which is still really solid. And I'll put you above playoff caliber because I could see you winning one. Purdue, easy bottom tier, just fired your coach, just lost like your total roster. Rutgers, below average, not a ton of talent there. UCLA, I really don't know what's going on at UCLA. But I don't think it's in the future. I don't think it looks very good. USC, I would say, is mediocre because, like, I think Lincoln Riley's a good coach, but the program's been trending down. And even though there's talent there, based off the past results, I can't say you're playoff caliber, but there's too much talent to say you'll stay below average. Washington, I'm going a playoff caliber team. I like Jed Fischel as a coach. I wish he was still at Arizona. I like Damon Williams as a quarterback for the next couple years. I think even transfer portal's been better. I could see bringing in a good recruiting class after building on some success and making a playoff. I believe in this Washington program a lot. All right, we got to hurry. Wisconsin, I'm going mediocre. Could drop to below average because I don't think you're going to have a great year this year. And I could see Luke Fickell being gone, and it could be rough for Wisconsin. Now, some independents. Washington State, below average because of what's transpired, losing your coach, losing a ton of your roster. Oregon State, I'm going to re-record the end of this video. So I don't know where it cut off, but we'll do the last few teams. Washington State was in below average because he has lost like your entire roster. Oregon State, I like what they've done in the transfer portal, so I moved them to mediocre. And then Notre Dame goes in the might get a title tier. I mean, you were really close this year under Marcus Freeman. The recruiting's pretty much at an all-time high. The defense is always really good. You've got a young quarterback in CJ Carr, but who knows what he might be, but there's at least a lot of potential there. The offensive line looks really good for the foreseeable future, and I think they could be there. So now let's just organize this real quick and then wrap it up. So yeah, Oregon, I would say most likely, then Texas. I'll go Bama, Michigan, Miami. Ohio State, top of might get a title, probably controversial, maybe a little bit biased because I root for Michigan. But that's where I have them right now. I can only pick 5 teams in this tier. Georgia would be next. Tennessee, because of what they're doing with quarterbacks, I would have there. I'd move Clemson below Notre Dame because I think the window is kind of only next year. Penn State, I also think the window is kind of 1 year, but I like Clemson's chances a bit better. And then Ole Miss, I have at the back end of that. Now, playoff caliber. First off, let's pick who I think makes the playoffs in these next 5 years and who doesn't. So Florida State is going to be probably the end because I'm most skeptical of them. TCU, SMU would be at the back because you just did this year. I think there's a lot of optimism there, but I'm not fully sold. Then TCU because it's kind of just a bet on talent. Let's go Colorado. Yeah, we'll go Colorado. And then Washington, I like a lot, but the Big Ten is going to be really difficult. Kansas State, I believe, Big Ten, Nebraska, I believe in a little bit less than Washington. Kansas State and ASU, I'm going to put Kansas State ahead a little bit. ASU ahead because I think the recruiting can be better, and I like Dillingham. Then these SEC teams, South Carolina would be at the back. I like this order, actually. Maybe flip that because I believe in Lagway a lot. And then I would put Georgia Tech in between them. So that's where I'll go with that tier. And then, I'm not going to reorganize these ones. They're so interchangeable. So these are my expected title teams. Might get a title, playoff caliber, mediocre, below average, and then the bottoms of the conference. Let me know, what did I get wrong? Who's too high? Who's too low? Where would you have these teams? If you enjoyed the video, you got to the end of it, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to help me grow the channel. Until next time.